And we spend so much time looking at China and India and Europe, and we spend so little time looking at our neighbor to the south. So I'm really excited about this series. This mini-series was the brainchild of Marcos Vidal. I don't see Marcos, but he's one of our RAs, so he helped us pull all of this together, and so much of what you'll see reflects his interests. But we have interesting talks on hydro, transportation, which we don't actually talk about as much as we should, also a talk about Brazilian ethanol, and then finally energy finance in Latin America. So I think it's going to be very interesting. And I'm delighted that we're going to be kicking off the first in this with actually someone who went to Stanford. And he got a master's degree, or Master of Science in economics here at Stanford, and also a PhD in environmental engineering. And that was after he got a degree in physics and also a degree in environmental pollution control at Penn State. So he's a very educated person, and I'm sure his ability to span the range of topics that he is going to very much reflect that. So Dr. Alvaro Umaña served as the principal advisor and leader of the Energy and Environment Group for the UN Development Program until 2004, and his international career includes a wide range of experiences in academia, public service, government, and non-governmental organizations. He's the founder and former chairperson of the World Bank Inspection Panel. He also served as the first Energy and Environment Minister of Costa Rica. So it's wonderful to know that Stanford grads are going on and doing such important work. He's currently at a senior research fellow at Cartier, working on climate economics and finance, payment for ecosystem services and biodiversity, and RED issues. So we're going to hear about that, and I'm delighted to welcome our speaker, Dr. Umaña.
Thank you. Well, it's always a great pleasure to be here among friends, young and older friends. And I'm glad to be here to talk to you about Costa Rica's energy system and its future development. One thing that, before we get into the project, to give you a context, Costa Rica right now has 90% renewable energy in its electrical system, 68% hydro, about 15% geothermal, and about 10 or a little bit over wind. And we are trying to stay above 90% renewables for two main reasons. We don't have any oil or coal. So from the beginning, our energy development has relied on renewables. And the mandate of the national utility was to develop hydropower. And they have done that very well, maybe too well, as you will see here. So what we have is a national electric utility that is not a monopoly, but almost more like Électricité de France, for those who know the European or French system. And they have tried to continue developing along these lines of renewable clean energy. And this is the Diquis Hydroelectric Project is the largest project in Central America. 620 megawatts, over 2 billion, closer to $3 billion. The debt of the utility right now, it's $3 billion. So this project would imply doubling the debt if it was financed with debt, okay? This project has been under study for more than 30 years, and it has suffered several changes along the way. The original project was 1,000 megawatts, and it was called Boruca. And you will see, I have a map later that I will show you. This earlier project had a dam using 2 rivers of the watershed, the 2 main rivers of the watershed, and a very large reservoir and higher impact on indigenous communities. This is a very important point, that the project is located in an area where there are indigenous reserves, indigenous people's reserves, that are by law, the reserves are defined and they have autonomy over their own reserves. So if there's going to be a Diquis project, the indigenous people are going to have to go along one way or another, okay? If they don't approve the project, there will never be a project there. That's more or less how the social equation works. The reason is that indigenous communities maybe have not been treated very well. Not only in Costa Rica, also in the US, but you know the story. And many of them, for example, one of the small reserves that the project will touch, the indigenous people that live there, the Cabecares, were left without a territory for 19 years. Because one government created the reserve, the next government killed it. Invasion took place by white people, and right now only 3% of the land is in the hands of indigenous people. This is the worst case that we have. But that is one of the communities that the utility has to negotiate with. Presently, the new design of the project changed from using 2 rivers to using only 1 river. And it reduced the reservoir by half. And it introduced the idea of a tunnel, 12-kilometer tunnel through the mountains to a power generating station down river, so that this way you could reduce the size of the reservoir by half. And of course have a smaller generating capacity, but still a very large project. Now, how many people are affected? 292 families. Only about 1,000 people. That's not a lot, but still requires the same type of negotiation as if you had a much larger population. And the present government was not able to conclude the negotiation with indigenous people because they say that the government wants to talk to them about this project. So the indigenous people will say, well, but we need a hospital. And the utility would say, well, we're not in the business of building hospitals. We have to bring you another part of the government that builds hospitals. So you see how we need schools. So the government has to negotiate as a unit, where they can provide all the different needs to the community that are not in the, let's say, in the operating plan of the utility. The utility might be able to provide the money, but they don't know how to build a hospital. So that's part of the problem. The solution appears to be, and it came also from the elders of the indigenous people, is that they will not be, first, ISA, the utility, cannot expropriate the indigenous people. This is not allowed by law. It has to be a voluntary negotiation. So what we're thinking of now is that the best solution is that the indigenous people don't sell the land, but lease it in the long term to the utility. And with the payments, from the utility, they can help rebuild the reserves to their original, area. So that seems, like something that could be worked out. The new government is going to have to negotiate with them. Now, this shows you how difficult it is today to build a hydro project. We had a workshop here at Stanford last year where the Woods Institute gathered a whole bunch of experts on dams. Excellent meeting. The only conclusion that I got is that here we have great experts on how to take down dams. We don't no longer have any experts on how to build dams because they're not being built anymore. So it's very interesting. Of course, you can learn a lot from taking down dams on how to build good dams, but it's still, that's what we found out. It was very interesting. Okay, so the dam is a 172 meter high dam on Rio General and creates a 6,800 hectare reserve. That's 2.5, 16,000 acres, around that. Then it has a 11-kilometer long tunnel that discharges into the river, and then, well, the tunnel is 10 meters in diameter and has a capacity of 260 cubic meters per second. Apparently, the tunnel has a lot less risk, seismic risk, than the dam. Okay, so it's better from a seismic perspective to have a tunnel than a dam, or a higher dam, like it was originally designed. And the level, the reservoir will fluctuate 40 meters. I'll show you a picture of the reservoir and the layout in just a second. The outlet works, the river, or after the power station, there's a 2.5 kilometer channel to reduce the speed and acclimate the temperature so that there will not be a temperature shock on the river. The dam or the reservoir has intakes at different heights so that they can control the temperature at which the water comes in to try to minimize the thermal shock. They are leaving what they call an ecological flow of 20 cubic meters per second so that they don't dry out the river completely. And with that, they generate extra power at the foot of the dam. Only 2 kilometers of river will be dry. And the Rio Cotobruz is 40% of the combined flow when the two rivers join, okay? Basically, what happens is that the power station will put out 200 cubic meters per second, okay? In the wet season, the river may have from 300 to 600 cubic meters per second. So the change is not so significant. During the dry season, the river will have as little as 50 cubic meters per second. So when you're putting 200 cubic meters per second in the dry season, it has a tremendous impact. It changes almost to a permanent winter condition. And the problem is that 10 miles down from the discharge of the river is a Ramsar protected wetland that would be affected by the quality of the water and the river. So that's, in addition to the consideration of indigenous people and how to protect upper watershed, there's also a problem on the discharge of the water into this wetland. Okay, so the ISE is now working on the environmental impact assessment. They have been working for about 5 years, and every year they keep delaying 1 more year for several problems. Okay, they have to do social and environmental baseline studies in the upper watershed, land use, the problem with the indigenous communities, all that. They have to identify the impacts, predict and value those impacts, propose mitigation or compensation measures, formulate a management plan, and integrate all the EIA components. Right now, they have invested several $1 million on baseline studies. You know, they have everything from plankton up. But we have identified problems in our law, for example, that force the utility to present everything together. And we would like the baseline studies to come out so that scientists could use them. Because the baseline studies do not affect the impact. You know, they just tell you what the conditions are at the beginning. So we're trying to change that. As I said, you know, there's a lot of important baseline studies that have done. So plankton, primary productivity, fish, reptiles, biocides. We find a chemical, bromacil, in the wetlands that is used in the pineapple growing areas, 100 kilometers upriver. And it is sort of a telltale sign of pollution by the pineapple industry. Pineapple, Costa Rica has quickly become the largest producer of pineapple in the world. We have 84% share of the US market. Okay, and pineapple is very environmentally destructive. There's no soil cover, the soil is bare. The chemicals that they use, a lot of chemicals, and they're polluting a lot of groundwaters in Costa Rica. And it has grown very, very fast. In 10 years, you know, we now have, pineapple is the #1 agricultural export.
Al,
Yes.
is that a fungicide?
Yes, yes. They've developed detailed maps of land use because this is a protected area, a protected wetland, but it has maybe 700-800 families living inside. This is something that we have in Costa Rica that is fairly common, that because not all protected areas are owned by the government. For example, in forest reserves, 80% is privately owned. Okay, so we have that problem there as well, of people living inside protected areas. They cannot get title, but people, they can't be moved out either. They would only be moved out by force, and the government doesn't do this. So they're somewhat in limbo, because they use the environment, but they don't own it. You know, so that creates other types of problems. We are trying to work on modeling, especially salinity, sediments, flow regimes, you know, this change in the flow regime. And we will see that ISE is quite flexible. And for example, you know, how could we stop this problem of having a very high flow in the summer? Okay, that's the biggest problem that they have, that they change the hydrograph of the river. So when the river is very dry, they're putting in a lot more water. This doesn't allow the salt to come in and it'll kill the mangroves. Okay? So somehow we have to find a way to reduce this problem or minimize it. And one of the things that we're thinking about is that they could, coordinate the tides at night so that you could shut down the project at night to a very, let's say, 10% capacity and allow the salt water to come in and do this several nights a week during the dry season to see if that would minimize the impact on the wetland. That's a big thing for a utility to say we'll shut down, but they don't have very high demand at night. So that's something that is, and they don't waste the energy because the water will be saved and used for later on. Okay, so that's the main impact, is the change in the flow regime in the dry season. It's also estimated that half of the sediments will be retained by the dam. So that could also be a problem, like it has been in the Aswan Dam and many dams, where you have a sediment problem. Well, here that might be less of a problem because the other river that is not used has very high sediment load. Okay, so this would be actually reducing overall sedimentation to more of a natural condition. And the temperature increases in the water would be another impact that they could control by drawing water from different levels and by the channel that they have at the end to stabilize. The wetlands is large. It's the largest in the country and one of the largest in Central America. And it includes 3 very different habitats. It includes mangroves, and in one area, very large area, the highest impact area is mangroves, but also palm and cerillo forests that are also wetlands, but a different type than mangroves. How much we could lose, it's very hard to tell right now. UCR has made some preliminary calculations that you may lose 300 hectares, but it might be a lot higher. We really don't know. This is not very easy to predict. You have to measure it empirically. A lot of these impacts are very complicated and you can't really predict what's going to happen. What you have to do is monitoring very closely. Okay, the population is from 400 to 500 people. Many of them live in fisheries or collecting shellfish. The problem that we have is that this area of 25,000 hectares has only 3 park guards. And they have 1 boat and 1 engine. And in one entire area, in the entire high impact area, they don't have any people at all. So it's, in a sense, a paper park. It's very well protected by the people who live there, but it doesn't have hardly any support from the government. And the utility could really change that, because the utility has the money to be able to do a very well done management plan. And actually, the utility has proposed that as part of their compensation, that they will become actively involved in the management of the protected area. And we'll see that as a positive step. There are some conservation gaps that need to be taken care of, and there are many threats in this area, the main one being drug trafficking. This is another complication of this project. The US has very effectively taken drug traffickers out of the sea, but they have pushed them into land. And they have pushed them so now Central America is an open highway for drug trafficking. And this is one of the problems that we have. You get a lot of boats, these speed boats coming from Colombia that just are beached there, and they take the cocaine out and move it up to Mexico and the US. So it's a very, very dangerous area, and you almost need a ranger station and a Coast Guard station next door to each other so that people are protected. When you talk to people around there, they say, well, in the evenings you start to see groups of men gathering, strange people that you don't know where they came from, and it's time for everybody to go home and shut down their houses, and they don't want to find out what's happening there. It's very, very dangerous. The biggest threat to the entire area, and Bill here did a study, Bill Durham, is palm oil. Palm oil dominates all agricultural options. It's better than cattle, better than rice. People, 6 times the normal income. This is happening all over the world, and it's happening in Costa Rica very much. So we need to find a way to do palm oil in a more environmentally sound way, and we're trying to do that with the Inogo project, another Woods Institute project working in the Osa Peninsula. And as I said, the reserve has 3 people, 2 are on loan, 1 boat, $60,000 annual budget. That it's, ridiculous. But that's the condition on the ground. There's been a Controller General report on the wetlands, and the Controller General says that the government is not fulfilling its role, and that it has to do this right away. So this is an additional pressure on the government to, to clean up its act and start providing adequate protection to the wetlands that are Ramsar sites. So we have an international duty under this convention to do a good job. Okay, so as I was telling you, the water in the rivers, the flow ranges from 45 to 400 or 600 cubic meters per second. Actually, during the Alma storm, this river was measured at over 12,000 cubic meters per second. So that's 300 times low flow. Okay? So the amount of water that can come through there is incredible. And the projects, of course, have to take that into account. But as I told you, the critical issue for us is the dry season. Okay? Because the seasonality of flows would be changed, but the one river is not affected. So that is better than when you use both rivers at the same time. And macro events like hurricanes are critical for sediment loads, for what I told you. If you can imagine the sediment load of a river when it's at 12,000 cubic meters per second and carrying, it's the amount of sediment that it carries there. And it was actually a fisherman who told us this. A fisherman who's been there 30 years. He says, this lagoons, where we are right now, it used to be 15 meters deep. Now we can only navigate in high tide. And I asked him, what happened? He says, the hurricanes. It started with Juana in the 70s and Mitch and this. And this is something that we really have to take into consideration, that the sediment loads during these extreme weather events are really what is dominating the systems today. And then the potential ecological impacts on productivity of the mangroves needs to be monitored. One of the big things that has taken place in Costa Rica in this area is a big whale watching industry. That is all, maybe, 5,000-10,000 people are living from whale watching now. The whales from California come all the way down to breed there, from Chile all the way up. And this is a very, very critical area. So we need to also understand what are the long-term changes that this project could introduce to the feedstock of marine animals like whales, and could this have an impact on tourism, etc. So these are very important issues. The impact of the sediments is uncertain. As I said, the dam will retain half of the sediments that come in. And increased sedimentation has been a threat to the mangrove, and the dam might actually reduce the sediment load on the mangrove, so it might have a positive effect. That's why ISA argues that this reducing of sediment load might be beneficial when you have too much. Okay. The future of the project is uncertain, and what is happening is that the first step, as I mentioned earlier, is the consultation process with indigenous people. The second is the environmental impact assessment. And the third is to analyze the overall condition of ICE and Costa Rica. Do we need a project that is so large? And ICE's financial situation is deteriorating, and its level of indebtedness is increasing. So that's a problem for them right now. As I mentioned, it would double their debt. And finally, a project this size is required by a large regional grid that we now have. So we can actually export electricity to other countries, or import, like we're doing right now. So it requires a regional framework. Let me show you quickly a graph or a this is how it looks on the ground. Here, this starfish that you see there, that's the reservoir in light blue. Here would be the water intake, and this would be the 11-mile tunnel, 11-kilometer tunnel, where the power generating station is. This would be the 2 kilometers to the discharge point in the river, and this is 10 miles down is the wetland. Okay. The China Quichá, that is one of the reserves, indigenous people reserves. And if you want to locate this in the Costa Rican map, this is the area where it is. It's in southern Costa Rica. Okay. ICE, I asked the head of ICE a few months ago, how much money has ICE invested in this project? And his answer was, I don't want to know. We may have invested already $200 million in this project, in studies and basic construction. And the present government decided that they couldn't make a decision yet on whether go, no go. Okay? So right now, it will be next year, 2015, when Costa Rica has to make a decision whether it's going to try to build this project or not. Now, let me give you a little bit more context. We already have a high level of debt. The ICE would like to build the project itself. The utilities have this inclination to try to build their own projects. And this is true for Costa Rica, it's true for China. One of the problems with Chinese is they will give you money to build any project, but they will build it themselves. That happened to us with a refinery, but the problem is that they wanted to give $1 billion for a refinery, but the feasibility study was done by a subsidiary of the bank that was financing the project. And that is not allowed in Costa Rican law, But this is the problems that we're going to have to deal with. Also, is the project too large? Are there better options? Well, we do have a law that allows for private power generation in Costa Rica, but only up to a certain limit, about 30% of total generation. And the reason for that is because all throughout Latin America, utilities were privatized during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Costa Rica was one of the countries that did not privatize its utility because the people felt that ICE had done a good job in delivering development. And it wanted to protect ICE. So they have kept the level of private power generation. Did this turn off? Yeah.
Is it okay?
It's okay. So the level of private power generation is under check. Last year, ICE had a bid. It opened a public bidding for 150 megawatts of renewable energy. It got offers from the private sector for 300 megawatts, mostly wind projects, at 9 cents per kilowatt, which is a very, very competitive and attractive price. All the new projects that ICE has built, the last 3 projects, have cost $5,000 per kilowatt of installed capacity. When traditionally hydro used to be between 2,000 and 3,000. And the reason why these projects have cost so much may have something to do with climate change, because the 3 projects have been flooded during the construction stage. Okay, and the last one, when they were, deviating the river to build the power station, high flow water came and destroyed the whole thing. $30 million worth of damage just in earth moving equipment. So this is a problem, that the new projects, the new hydro projects, are expensive. The country and the utility have a high level of debt. And why would they want to build a project this size when you could have the private sector build small projects and you don't have to make any investment? So this is part of the debate that is going on in Costa Rica right now. I don't know, I would like to stop here and open so that you can ask questions and give us good advice as to what we should do.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, let's start with questions from students. Yeah, okay, back there in the yellow shirt. Yeah.
You mentioned that other options in place of this dam, if they don't go ahead and build it, include wind power and such. Is the dam needed for baseload? You mentioned earlier that almost the entirety of Costa Rica's energy is renewable. And most of that's hydro. Does Costa Rica feel like they can afford not to build this dam and still have enough baseload in their other hydro plants that they can build out the rest of their needs in terms of wind and solar and other renewables, or is this necessary?
Yes, what they love for baseload is geothermal, because you can run it 24 hours a day, no change. But all hydro systems require some thermal reserve. Okay, so we do have 10 to 12%. We actually have like 20% capacity of thermal power. But the thermal power is with diesel, and it's costing them 10 times as much as the long-term marginal cost of hydro development, which used to be 5 cents per kilowatt. So yes, they do have enough for base load. They would like to have this plant for a much larger system, and so they can export to Central America, because there's now a connected line that allows for electricity trade in Central America. But the question is, you know, could you do 300 megawatts of wind power or small hydropower? Yes, you can. And you could do it more with the private sector and less investment with the government. But that will require, you know, a change in Costa Rican attitudes that tend to rely more on the public power. There's more, let's say, hesitation and concern about private power. Whether that's right or not, you know, it's sort of a historical accident.
Okay, another one, yeah, back there.
I kind of agree with the sentiment of your closing questions about why now with the increased debt. It sounds like it'll be a 7% increase, 7% GDP increase in the government's debt for this project. And it also sounds like Costa Rica is already a power exporter, so it's more of a business.
We're normally a power exporter except in the dry season. Right now, we're importing 8 to 9% from Central America, because it's cheaper to import from Central America to run our own thermal power plants.
Okay, that kind of takes some of the wind out of my question. It just seems like a huge project that's going to be on the Costa Rican taxpayer that might not be really needed for future development, but maybe that's poorly formed.
Yeah, if there is an alternative, you know, why would you want to build such a large project? Or why would you want to build it right now? Well, you know, utilities have a different rationale. As you know, in California, you know, you've dealt with PG&E for many years. They would like to build this project because it's their project. They've developed it with their own engineers. You know, they have already invested quite a bit in construction. The government, with a different optic, is saying to them, you need an equity partner, you know, because your level of indebtedness does not allow you to take on more debt. So you need an equity partner, which could be the Chinese. You know, the Chinese would be a good partner, except that they also want to build a project. See, so they're at odds with ISA because both want to build a project. So it's not very likely that they would finance this. We could try to get another serious partner. For example, could be the Norwegian oil fund, you know, that could invest in a project like this as an equity partner, not providing a loan that you have to pay back. So this will be a huge debate in Costa Rica, and ISA would say, well, if we don't build the project, this would be a great blow to our, you know, pride.
Over there, yep.
I'm curious if you guys looked at offshore wind farms.
Not yet. Not yet. All wind is inland.
Like from the large ones that I was just looking up, like the construction costs were about equal to what you're projecting for
That's
and
right.
you won't have all these environmental concerns about cementation.
And you know, wind allows you to build, it's like also not only wind, but small hydro. See, a small hydro also has a cost of $5,000 per kilowatt. So why not go with more smaller projects rather than one big project? You know, that's another. But then ISA would also say, well, I have a sunk cost here already, you know, from 3 decades of studies, plus probably $200 million worth of investment. So they have a lot vested in the project, and they don't want to let it go.
Okay, next. Well, I've got one for you. So we've done a lot of work looking at energy storage. And from a net energy point of view, pumped hydro is by far the most advantageous kind of energy storage that we could have.
Yes.
And, so I look at, this story and I think, oh my goodness, how complex this is to cite a hydro project and all of these, environmental impacts, these indigenous communities. I mean, do you think that this is sort of a typical example of the complexity of these kind of projects, and that ultimately our ability to take advantage of pumped hydro storage, for example, will be limited by land use and indigenous populations and all those issues?
Well, we don't have any pump hydro in Costa Rica.
Right, yeah.
And there's no reason, why we shouldn't. Because we do have excess power at night, and you could be, just pumping it back up.
Yeah.
But they rather build new projects, than what this project shows is that there is not a single hydro project in Costa Rica that doesn't have major impacts either on agricultural land, on indigenous people, on conservation. That is the reality. That's why these projects are so hard to build, and there are so few of them in the world. You were telling me that this is the only hydro project that you have been able to find. Of course, there's Brazil, and Brazil has plans for 14 major dams in Peru, for example. Odebrecht, the Brazilian private sector. So there are big forces in the world trying to push big hydro projects. But I think pump storage, smaller hydro projects, and wind projects might be a lot better alternative than trying to go for a massive $3 billion project.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so we'll open it up to everybody. Yeah, please.
You talked about sediment coming
Yes.
down, and there's a considerable amount. How would that affect the useful life of the dam, and also where you take the water out?
Okay. Now here you have, here's where the two rivers join. This the dam site, and this is the river. Okay? This is where the other river comes. This river is full of sediment. This one too, because of deforestation in the upper watershed. But the reservoir will hold half the sediment. And they don't have a sediment removal plan they don't have a sediment removal plan. They are just letting it accumulate in the dead spaces of the reservoir. And that's another question that we have, whether that is a wise decision or not. Okay, because what they're saying, no, for the useful life of the project, we will let that half of the sediment just accumulate there.
What's the lifetime of the...
50, we built our first power plant in 1950. It's still operating. So it's hard to know what the useful life will be. The useful life tend to be extended at the end. We have not taken down any dams in Costa Rica ever. So we don't know what the use, but some of them have to be dredged constantly, especially the smaller run-of-river dams, because the sediment will accumulate in them very fast. Yes?
Are you worried at all, Al, about the possibility that an extreme need might arise to make sure that that river gets some water because it's so dry?
Mm-hmm.
And that the electricity market is presenting a different set of alternatives that competes with the needs
of the water.
Low flow in the river every day. Is there a way of resolving that?
Another problem that we have now related to what you're saying, Don, is that, we are having big changes in the rainfall patterns in Costa Rica. Whether you say it's climate change or not, it's a reality that is raining different. The northern part of Costa Rica, all this that it used to be very wet, for the last 2 years, it's extreme drought. And at the same time, you have very heavy rainfall in other areas and destruction of crops and roads. And so what if we make a big investment like that and it stops raining in that area? See? So that's another different type of risk that we don't know how to account for. That's why, this is it's a very difficult decision that the government will have to make. Bill?
Listening to you talk, there are so many concerns and worries and possible issues. It sounds like no one has the authority to tell ICE no.
That's not quite right, but it's close to,
Who could stop ICE?
The government, the central government can stop ICE.
The president could say, no, we don't want this. And
Yes. Yeah. It has never been done because ICE is very, as you know, is very well respected in Costa Rica. So they can get away with a lot more things than other weaker agencies could never get away with. But also, they are the only utility in Latin America that has not had brownouts, that has delivered power to 99% of Costa Rica. So, it's a complicated political question. And the last thing is the new head of ICE, this past week, the first thing that they asked him after he was named is, are we going to build Diquis? And he said, Diquis is essential to our plans. Okay? So, they're still holding on to it. If I had to bet, I think what will dominate the decision from now on will be, first, the indigenous people and social considerations. If they don't make that, it's dead on the water. Everybody will accept that. But after that, more than the environmental impact assessment is going to be the economic considerations. How can you finance something like this? ICE is allowed to take on debt without government guarantee. Okay? So this happened when we approved the free trade agreement with the US. One of the conditions for this approval was a law to strengthen ICE. See, because the other part that I haven't mentioned that complicates things further is that ICE has both electricity and telecommunications. Okay? And when we approved the free trade agreement with the US, we also approved the opening of telecom. Okay? So now you have Slim and Telefónica of Spain competing with ICE in the telephone and cell phone market. And they're all losing money because the rates are too low. So ICE used to finance, from telephones, they could, especially international calls, they could finance part of the deficit in the electrical sector. Well, when they told them you have to keep separate accounts of electricity and telecommunications, and with very low rates, you can send a text message in Costa Rica for 1 colon, which is 1/500th of a dollar. Okay, and now they raised the rates to 3 colones, but it's still a ridiculously low price. So ICE has also this problem of how to deal with telecom. And no longer, now the best things telecom companies had were international calls. Now the price of international calls is almost zero with Skype and all the internet communications. So that's another complicating factor. So we will see, but I am very, very unsure that the government will be able to find either a big equity partner that will come in and put $1 billion or be able to finance it with debt. Costa Rica, we now don't owe hardly any money to other countries. All the debt is to the bondholders. Okay, the last emission, the last issues of debt that we had were at 4.25%. Last year it went to 5.6%. The debt that we put in the markets last month was at 7%. Okay, so once you have to start to pay more and more and more for debt, that starts to foreclose that option. So this is, what it takes to build a new project there. And next year I can come back and tell you more or less where it's going. It wouldn't be online until 2021 to 2022 anyway. We're talking a decision that it's 5-6 years away.
Do we have one more question? Mm-hmm.
So given that, well, you just added one, the cost of debt is rising. The costs of the project have escalated over time. Is the economic case still there? Like, is the levelized cost of energy from this dam going to be less than the cost of imported power, or be able to compete in these international markets where you're going to be exporting power? Or is this going to be just investment that sits on ISA's balance sheet that isn't actually going to be repaid by the savings in cost?
Well, it's a hard question to answer if you don't know exactly how much the project is going to cost. Because what they've been saying is the project will cost $2 billion, but they end up costing $3 billion, 50% more. So all the economic analysis changes, and you don't know how much it's going to cost you until you actually do it, because you do have a lot of contingencies, climate, otherwise, rainfall, many things that can. So that is the problem.
Is there a sense of what the break-even project cost would be, and the likelihood of exceeding that?
Yes, this project would definitely cost more than 10 cents a kilowatt. Yeah. The long-run marginal cost in the past for Costa Rica was 5 cents a kilowatt. So all the new projects are costing twice as much as the old projects.
And what's the cost of imported power?
The cost of imported power now is like less than 10 cents.
So, yeah.
The problem is that you don't have all that much power to import. Because all the Central American countries are dry at the same time. So you need, for example, to have much more. Yeah, all the Pacific is dry. So they are actually generating thermal power to export. So you need to do things like have more cogeneration in sugar mills in the dry season. See, the sugar mills come in exactly at the low point of the water. So they actually make a very important contribution. And the utilities are trying to build more of this type of private power that they can import at the right time. But I think that the future might be more, this new government was very much in support of ISE. But the industrial sector is telling them we cannot deal with such high power costs. And the only way to reduce the cost of power is to go to the private sector. and have them invest in smaller wind and hydro projects. And that might be the way that they're forced to go in the end.
All right, well, we have an energy social, the Center for Latin American Studies is sponsoring that. So I think we can continue the conversation outside. So thank you very much. That was fascinating.
Thank you.